At midnight, something fell and never screamed. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Tell me your city. I read them all. Wolfe measures the silence below. I was perched on the edge of Wolfe's red leather chair, trying to look like a useful secretary instead of a spare umbrella stand. Outside, a thin drizzle washed West 35th Street, and inside the office the brownstone smelled of books, tobacco, and whatever Fritz was coaxing into dinner downstairs. Wolfe sat behind his desk, massive and calm, eyes half shut as if the world were an interruption he might forgive. He had spent the morning with orchids, so his temper was in that cool, dangerous balance. The client was a woman in her middle 30s, slim enough to look fragile and composed enough to show it was a trick. She held her hat in her lap and worried a pair of gloves, folding and unfolding them with the patience of someone timing her panic. Her name was Corinne Ledbetter. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "I don't need protection. I need an understanding, and I need it before tonight is over." Wolfe opened his eyes a fraction. "You assume that I am willing to be hurried." "I'm paying for your time," she said. "But there's a thing that will happen at midnight. And if I don't know why it's happening, I can't stop it. A body is going to be dropped at my doorstep." That got my spine interested. Wolfe didn't move, but his brow rose a shade. "A corpse?" "Yes, a man. I don't know who, not for certain. I think I do. I hope I don't." Her hands tightened on the gloves. The message was too specific to be a prank. "What message?" Wolfe asked. She produced a folded note. I opened it. It was typed, unsigned. "At midnight you will receive what you deserve. Doorstep delivery. Keep your phone quiet." Wolfe read it and set it on the blotter. "Who sent it?" "That's why I'm here. I'm not sure. There are 5 people who might want to frighten me. One might want me ruined. One might want a murder pinned on me." She lifted her chin. "I can't tell which is worse." "Be exact," Wolfe said. She nodded and laid out the facts. She was executive director of the Harrow Foundation, a charity with enough money to attract trouble. 2 weeks ago, the board voted to sell a property upstate, the old Harrow estate, and use the proceeds for a new urban program. She opposed the sale, saying it violated the donor's intent. The vote passed anyway. Yesterday, she went to the foundation's office and found her file drawer open and the estate appraisal missing. No one admitted taking it. "The estate is worth 8 figures, she said. "Tonight the papers are being reviewed for signing tomorrow. I was told to stay out of it. I didn't. They need me quiet, or they need me discredited." I said, "Let's meet your 5. "Dwight Harrow," she said at once. "The founder's grandson, a playboy with a grudge. He demands control, says the board is squatting on his inheritance. He hates me because I got the board to ignore him." "1," I said. "Next." "Marvin Kestel, board chair. He wants the sale and wants his name on the program. Celia Dawn, the CFO, brilliant and ruthless. Father Javier Ruiz, a trustee, quiet but persuasive, often in private with Kestel. And Amos Vale, the foundation's counsel. He handles papers and favors." Wolfe's face stayed blank. "Your residence," he said. "Describe it." "A townhouse on East 73rd. No doorman. Front steps to the street, a side gate to a narrow walk, and a rear door to a shared courtyard. No cameras." She gave a humorless smile. "How did the messenger look?" I asked. "Cap, plain coat. My maid saw him only a moment. She couldn't help." Wolfe was silent long enough for the rain to give up. Then he said, "You want me to prevent a body from appearing. I want you to find out whose body and why mine is the porch they chose. If a man is killed and placed at my door, I will be the first suspect. I can't allow that." Her voice dipped. "And if it's someone I know, I need to know before dawn." Wolfe sighed. "Archie, your schedule." Dinner at 7, then a date with a pillow, I said. Cancel the pillow. We will dine, and afterwards you will accompany Miss Ledbetter to her residence. You will observe. You will not interfere unless required. At midnight, if a body is delivered, you will preserve evidence and prevent homicide if still possible. I looked at him. You're taking it? Obviously. To her, he said, my fee is satisfactory. You will sign a check before you leave. Corinne Ledbetter exhaled like she'd been holding her lungs hostage. She wrote the check, handed it over, and stood. I walked her to the door, already tasting Fritz's cooking and imagining what midnight on East 73rd might throw onto a woman's steps. New York is generous that way. Tonight, apparently, it planned to be generous with a dead man, and I was the fellow Wolfe sent to receive the delivery. We ate at 7 sharp because in Wolfe's house that isn't a suggestion, it's law. Fritz served duck with a sauce that could make a man confess, and Wolfe drank his beer and said almost nothing. Miss Ledbetter moved food around her plate like she expected it to bite back. At 8:30, Wolfe lit a cigar and nodded to me. In the hall he said, when you arrive, telephone Inspector Kramer. Tell him only that I am retained and that you anticipate an incident at midnight. Right. Yes. Do not let your imagination substitute for observation. I grabbed my coat, checked my shoulder holster, and went down the steps with Miss Ledbetter into rain. She had come in a cab, and we rode uptown in silence. First, Mr. Goodwin, she said, staring at blurred street lights, do you think this is meant to frighten me or destroy me? Those are cousins, I told her. Let's see which one shows up. We reached her townhouse on East 73rd before 9. Exposed for my taste. No doorman, no camera, just front steps and a side gate to a dim walk. The rain kept the sidewalks empty. Inside, a maid named Mrs. Pottle met us with wet eyes. Miss Corinne, I didn't read it, she blurted. Miss Ledbetter steadied her. Make coffee, then go to your room, lock the door, and don't come out unless I call. This is Mr. Goodwin. The maid fled. Corinne led me into a prim front parlor where the chairs were built for display. I took the one nearest the window. Anyone else in the house? No, just Mrs. Pottle. Tell me again about yesterday. She swallowed. At the foundation office, my drawer was forced. The appraisal for the Harrow estate was missing, along with my letters to the donor's archivist. Nothing else. I asked Amos Vale. He said he would look into it. He was serene. Who knew you'd come home early today when the note was delivered? Only Celia Dawn, I think. The meeting ended badly. I left without announcing it. I went to the hall phone. Kramer answered like I'd rung to steal his lunch. Inspector, Archie Goodwin. I'm at Miss Ledbetter's. Mr. Wolfe is retained. We expect something odd at midnight. I wanted you to have the address. Odd how? A body. Don't play games. I'm not. If there's trouble, you won't be blindsided. If there's trouble, you call me and keep your paws off evidence. Deal, I said and hung up. By 10, coffee was cooling and Miss Ledbetter was pacing. I nudged her into a chair where she could see the clock. I watched the front steps through a slit in the curtain. At 10:15, a man in a dark overcoat walked past, slowed at her stoop, and looked up. He crossed to the awning opposite, lit a cigarette, and waited. Under the street lamp, his face was narrow and too alert to be a neighbor. I eased to the vestibule and cracked the inner door. He spotted me instantly and came over. I'm looking for Miss Ledbetter. My name is Marvin Kestel. One of our 5 suspects and the board chair. I left the chain on. She isn't receiving. This is urgent. Tell her I need 5 minutes. Corinne had drifted into the parlor entrance, pale but steady. She nodded. I opened the door the width of the chain. 5 minutes in the hall, no farther. Kestel stepped inside, rain beading on his shoulders. 50-ish, hair silver at the temples, eyes sharp, wearing that bland authority people practice in boardrooms. Corinne, he said, using her first name like a claim. Mr. Kestrel, you shouldn't be here. I agree, but you forced me. I'm told you hired Nero Wolfe. I have. Why? The sale vote was proper. Your objections were heard. If you keep stirring this up, you'll damage the foundation and yourself. Someone sent you a childish threat. Don't let it make you hysterical. Hysterical, she repeated softly. My files were stolen. A man threatened to leave a body at my door. Is that childish? His eyes flicked to me. What files? The appraisal, my correspondence. You know which. A muscle jumped at his jaw, then disappeared. This is internal business. Wolfe turns disputes into headlines. Tonight you should go to bed. In the morning we'll handle whatever prank this is. Is that advice or pressure? Concern. I don't want you ruined. She studied him. Leave. For a beat I thought he might argue. Then he nodded once. If anything happens tonight, remember I came to prevent it. He stepped out and walked away fast. Corinne sank into the chair. He's never come here before. What time did he know you'd left the office? He knew I wasn't there. Celia called him after I walked out. Midnight was still an hour away. The rain kept falling, and the street outside looked empty enough for secrets. I stayed by the window, thinking about Kestrel's cigarette and that twitch of his jaw. Whatever got dropped here at midnight, it had already started landing inside the foundation. At 11:15, the maid called down from her room to ask if she should bring another pot of coffee. Corinne told her no, voice steady enough to fool Mrs. Pottle, if not herself. I kept my eyes on the street until the second hand on the parlor clock started to sound like a threat. At 11:30, a cab stopped at the curb. A woman got out, tall, in a raincoat the color of old pennies, hat pulled low. She paid the driver, looked at the house, and came up the steps. I opened the inner door before she could ring. Closed shop, I said. She smiled with one side of her mouth. Archie Goodwin, I presume. I'm Celia Dawn. I left the chain on. Miss Ledbetter isn't receiving. She will. Tell her Celia is here, and that I'm not leaving until she listens. Corinne appeared behind me. Celia, how did you find me? I called Mrs. Pottle. She told me you had company. I came because this is getting out of hand. She held up her purse. May I come in? Corinne hesitated, then said, In the parlor, briefly. I unhooked the chain. Celia stepped in, shedding rain. She didn't sit until Corinne did, then faced her, legs crossed, hands folded. You hired Wolfe, Celia said. Marvin just told me. I didn't advertise it. You didn't have to. Corinne, what are you trying to do? Stop the sale? Embarrass the board? You're jeopardizing the foundation over sentiment. Over intent, Corinne said. Harrow meant that estate to be preserved. Celia leaned forward. Harrow is dead. The city programs are alive. $10 million will house families. Why fight? Because someone is stealing documents and threatening me. Are you involved? Celia's eyebrows rose. Threatening you with a corpse? Don't be theatrical, I don't know about your missing files. But your insinuations are dangerous. If you want to accuse someone, do it in Wolfe's office, not by making yourself a public spectacle. I said, spectacles sometimes get scheduled for midnight. Celia turned to me. You actually believe this note? I believe somebody wanted her scared enough to call Wolfe. She looked back at Corinne and her voice cooled. If you withdraw your opposition tonight, if you send me an email saying you'll support the sale, we can handle the missing papers quietly. We can keep you safe. Safe from what? Corinne asked. From the board's displeasure, from the press, from yourself. She rose. I'm offering you a chance to step back before you're pushed. Corinne stood too. No. Celia held the gaze a moment, then nodded. Very well. If something vile appears on your doorstep, remember you refused help. She walked to the hall, paused at the door. Tell Wolfe he's playing with a foundation that can afford to bite. Then she left. Corinne sank into the chair. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded like she wanted you to yield before it arrives. That could be fear or choreography. I checked the clock. 11:45. Any other visitors expected? She shook her head. At 11:50, I went to the vestibule and opened the outer door a crack. No one on the sidewalk. No idling car. Behind me, Corinne stood at the parlor window, white as the curtains. At 2 minutes to midnight, a shape appeared at the corner, moving fast under an umbrella. It was a man, medium height, carrying something dark over one shoulder. I eased the door wider and stepped onto the top step. Staying in shadow, he crossed the street without looking up. When he reached the stoop, he set the load down. It was a body wrapped in plastic tarp, tied with clothesline. The umbrella tilted, and I saw a face under the brim of a cap. "Hold it," I said. He froze, eyes flat and startled, then bolted down the steps. I went after him. The rain made the sidewalk slick, and he had a head start. I caught him at the side gate as he fumbled for the latch. We hit the iron hard, and I got a fistful of coat. He swung an elbow. I ducked and shoved him back. "Who's in that tarp?" "Let go," he rasped. "Not until you answer." He wriggled, and I tightened my grip, then felt a sharp jab in my ribs, hard as a knuckle. My breath punched out. While I blinked, he slipped free and sprinted into the alley, vanishing between townhouse walls. I knelt by the bundle and felt for any warmth through the slick tarp. Cold, but not freezer cold. The knotwork was clumsy, done fast. A wallet bulged near the hip. I didn't touch it. From inside came the faint, sour smell of whiskey and something metallic. I straightened and listened. Somewhere a door clicked, far off, then silence on the wet, empty block. I stood there a second, cursing my reflexes. Then I went back to the steps. Corinne was in the doorway, hand over her mouth, eyes huge. "That's a man," she said. "Yeah. Let's see if he's in a hurry to stay dead." We dragged the bundle into the vestibule, because leaving it on the steps was an invitation to every night owl with a camera. Corinne's hands shook, but she helped, jaw set like she was hauling in a net. Once inside, I shut the outer door, locked it, and knelt with my ear near the top. No breath. I cut the clothesline with my pocket knife, peeled back plastic, and found a man in his 40s, heavy, face slack, eyelids half open as if he'd been interrupted mid-complaint. A neat knife hole below his left breast had soaked his shirt and pooled on the top. Corinne made a sound that started as a gasp and ended as a question. "Who is he?" "Let's keep it that way till Kramer sees him." I stood and went to the phone. "Inspector Kramer," I said when he answered. "Delivery arrived. Male, dead, wrapped in tarp. East 73rd. Front vestibule." "Damn it. Touch anything?" "Only to check for life. I left his pockets alone." "Stay put. I'm on my way." I hung up and called Wolfe. He answered on the first ring. I told him what we had and about the carrier slipping off. He grunted. "Was the carrier known to you?" "Cap, coat, average build, fast runner, and quick with a blade. That's all I got." "A pity. Preserve the scene. I will speak to Kramer." Corinne sat on the bottom step, staring at the body. I pulled a chair from the parlor and parked myself between her and the vestibule. The rain tapped at the transom and the house felt smaller, as if the dead weight in the hall had taken up all the air. "Tonight was meant to make you look guilty," I said. She swallowed. "If it's someone from the foundation, don't guess yet. Who has been in this house lately?" "No one, except Amos Vale. He's been here twice with documents." "Recently?" "Last week for the appraisal summary. He left before dinner." The dead man's face kept nagging at me. I'd seen it somewhere, probably across a desk. The first siren wailed at 12:15. A patrol car stopped out front. Then 2 uniforms came in and stared without leaning. 5 minutes later, Kramer arrived, hat dripping, scowl ready. He took one look at the body. "You weren't kidding?" "I rarely kid about corpses," I said. He crouched, lifted the tarp further, and swore softly. "I know this mug. It's Amos Vale." Corinne recoiled. "Amos? No, he was alive at 6. Kramer straightened. "Your counsel. Foundation lawyer, what in blazes—" "Somebody wanted him found here," I said. "He was delivered 5 minutes ago." The uniforms began their routine, photographing and noting. Kramer kept me near. "Tell me exactly." I did, from the note to the chase, and about Kestel and Celia visiting. Kramer listened, eyes narrowing. "Convenient crowd," he muttered. "Where's Wolfe?" "At home, but he's got the reins." "He always does." Kramer looked at Corinne. "Miss Ledbetter, you had a dispute with this man." "He was advising the sale. We argued, yes, but I didn't—" "I know. Still, you'll come downtown later to give a statement. For now, don't leave." Corinne nodded. Kramer pulled me aside. "Wolfe called me. Wants the body moved to his place for an office show. I told him no. This is police business." "Then let him handle the living part," I said. Kramer snorted. "First I want alibis. You got 5 board members tied to this, and now their lawyer is dead on your client's porch. Somebody there's playing rough." He went back to the vestibule and watched the men bag Vale's hands. "The medic said time of death may be an hour. 1 stab wound." "Stabbed," I repeated to myself. "Personal." Kramer turned to me. "Stay available. If Wolfe sends you out, fine, but don't cross me. And tell him I won't have civilians tampering with witnesses." "I'll pass the love." By 1 o'clock, they carried Amos Vale out on a stretcher, and the wet street gleamed off the plastic like a bad joke. Kramer left a uniform at the door, told Corinne to get some sleep, and walked out with a face that said he'd be awake for both of us. I locked up, guided Corinne upstairs, and waited until I heard her door click. Then I went to her study, sat at the desk, and finally let myself breathe through sore ribs. On the blotter lay her calendar, open to tomorrow's signing, with Vale's name penciled beside noon, and under it a torn corner of envelope that hadn't been there earlier. I pocketed nothing, just noted the fresh, ragged edge and a faint smear of rainwater. Vale had been the linchpin, and now he was a very quiet one. Someone had stolen the appraisal and killed the man who could swear to it, then planted him here to frame Corinne and scare the board into line, or to scare Wolfe out. I smiled at that. If you try to frighten Nero Wolfe, you better bring more than a dead lawyer in a tarp. I was back at the brownstone a little after 2, damp, sore, and wired. Fritz let me in with a look that asked questions he wouldn't speak, and I found Wolfe in the office, rooted in his chair as if midnight corpses were part of the household schedule. He had a fresh cigar and the calm of a judge who already knows the verdict. "Well," he said. I gave him the picture, including Kramer identifying Vale, the visitors, the chase, and the torn envelope fragment in Corinne's study. "You did not remove it," he said. "No, but it wasn't there before." "Good," Wolfe said. "Your ribs?" "Still attached." "What now?" "Now you sleep for 4 hours. At 7:30 you will go to the Harrow Foundation office. You will see Mr. Kestel, Miss Dawn, Father Ruiz, Mr. Harrow. You will say nothing except that I require their presence here at 11. Kramer won't like a civilian roundup." I did not ask for his approval. Wolfe's eyes stayed on me. The murder complicates matters. It also clarifies them. Amos Vale knew the sale's true terms and perhaps its true beneficiary. The appraisal missing from Miss Ledbetter's drawer is central. Whoever took it intended to control information. Whoever killed Vale intended to silence or redirect it. Whoever deposited him at her house intended to frame her and to instruct me. These intentions may reside in one person, or 2, or 3, but not 5. The note specified midnight delivery and a quiet phone. That implies surveillance of her home and schedule. If Dawn wanted mere intimidation, she would choose something safer than a corpse. Yet her visit was too pointed to be empty. Kestel's visit was almost protective. We need their reactions under one roof. I said, "You think the board wanted Amos dead because he knew something about the estate?" Wolfe lifted a finger. "Perhaps the estate is not merely valuable. Perhaps it is encumbered by a fact that makes its sale dangerous. The appraisal could reveal fraud or a hidden asset. Vale might have counseled deception and then threatened exposure. In either case, his death on Miss Ledbetter's stoop is a stratagem. We shall unravel it." He dismissed me with a tilt of his head. On the way up, I saw the orchid room lights still on. Even with a murder on his hands, Wolfe wouldn't let the Blooms miss a dawn, ever. I went upstairs, slept like a bad witness, and woke to Fritz knocking and coffee that tasted like orders. At 7:45, I was at the Foundation's Midtown office, all marble and glass, the kind of place where voices echo and consciences don't. The receptionist's smile thinned when I gave my name, but Celia Dawn appeared within a minute, eyes bright and dry. "Archie," she said, "you picked a dramatic way to start a morning." "So did your lawyer." The color drained a notch. "He's dead. On Miss Ledbetter's doorstep. If you want to help her, you'll come to Wolfe's at 11. He wants you, Kestel, Ruiz, Harrow. You can bring a halo if it helps." She stared, then said, "I'm not taking orders from Nero Wolfe. The police are involved. The police will do their part. Wolfe will do his. I suggest cooperation. Marvin is in a meeting. Father Ruiz is at St. Catherine's. Dwight is who knows where. I can't summon them like children." "Try. Or tell them Wolfe will summon them through the district attorney. He'll make noise, Celia. That's his art." A flicker crossed her face, more calculation than anger. She took the card I offered, saying nothing. I walked past glass offices to Kestel's door. A young assistant said he was unavailable. I told her I'd wait and went in anyway. Kestel was on the phone, voice low. He covered the receiver. "Goodwin, this is not a good time." "It is now." I watched him as he ended the call. His face was gray, tie not too tight. "Where were you between 11 and 1 last night?" I asked. His eyes widened. "Are you accusing me of murder?" "I'm asking an obvious question. Amos Vale is dead." He sat heavily. "How?" "Knife, delivered to Corinne. You visited her at 10:15. Celia visited at 11:30. Somebody else visited at midnight with a tarp." Kestel pressed fingers to his forehead. "I was at home after 10. My wife can vouch. I came to warn Corinne. Amos was on my side. Then you'll warn her again at Wolfe's, 11, all of you." He looked up sharply. "Why should I?" "Because if you don't, Wolfe will assume you're hiding, and he has a way of making assumptions public." I stood. "See you there?" Outside, the day had turned hard and cold. I headed for St. Catherine's to net Father Ruiz, and then I'd try to find Dwight Harrow in whatever nest he'd chosen. By the time Wolfe gathered them in his office, I wanted their nerves frayed and their stories pinned down. The midnight body drop had been meant to end a dispute. It had only started one. St. Catherine's was doing brisk trade in candles and quiet guilt when I slipped into a pew and caught Father Javier Ruiz after morning mass. He was shorter than I expected, with that tidy, soft-eyed look that makes people confess without realizing they've started. I introduced myself and watched the priest's face tighten at the mention of Amos Vale. "Amos was a difficult man," he said in the sacristy, raincoat draped over a chair, "but he served the Foundation." "He served it dead last night," I said. "Mr. Wolfe wants you at the brownstone at 11. He didn't flinch. "Is this a police summons?" "No, it's a Nero Wolfe summons." He folded his hands. "I have counsel with the shelter board at noon. Reschedule. This is about Harrow money and a corpse on a doorstep." His eyes dropped a moment. Miss Ledbetter called me late. Before midnight. She was afraid. I told her to stay calm. You were with her on the phone at what time? Just before 11. 10:50, perhaps. Where were you after that? In my rectory. I read until sleep. Brother Ansel can attest. He sighed. I will come. It is my duty. On the ride, I kept seeing the carrier's cap and Vale's blank eyes. The 2 visits to Corinne had felt like rehearsals, and now I wondered who had written the script. If the missing appraisal mattered enough to kill for, the boardroom was only a mask for someone else. I left him and took a cab downtown to a club a bartender had tipped me about when Dwight Harrow's name came up. The place was called The Grotto, which offered a chrome bar, low music, and girls in daylight sunglasses. Harrow was at a corner table with a tumbler and 2 companions who looked hired to laugh. He saw me and let his mouth curl. Archie Goodwin, he said. Wolfe's errand boy. Did somebody die, or just the board's manners? Somebody died. Amos Vale. You're due at Wolfe's at 11. His companions went quiet. Harrow's eyes sharpened, then he waved them off. Amos. Dead how? Stabbed, wrapped and dumped on Corinne Ledbetter's stoop. The police are chewing on it. Wolfe's chewing faster. Harrow leaned back. That's a theatrical way to shut her up. Unless it was meant to frame her. Or to warn her, he said softly. I watched him. For a playboy, he was quick. You know something about warnings. He smiled thinly. I know the Harrow estate was never clean. My grandfather collected secrets. Some are still in that house upstate. If Vale is dead, maybe he opened a drawer he shouldn't. What drawer? He shrugged. Ask your genius. I'm coming because I'd like to see who's sweating. At 10:30, I hustled back to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the office, Saul Panzer in the red chair by the door. Saul's hat on his knee told me Wolfe had already leaned on him. You're late, Wolfe said. I brought fish. Ruiz is coming. Harrow, too. Celia and Kestel should be on their way. Saul stood. Morning, Archie. Wolfe had me look into Amos Vale's last hours. He left the foundation at 9:15, went to a small bar on Lexington, met an unknown man, argued, left at 10:20. From there, nothing solid until the tarp ride. Wolfe grunted. Unknown man. Average build, cap, dark coat, not one of our board luminaries. The bartender says they spoke about the appraisal and the annex. Annex? I said. Saul nodded. Vale said it twice, loud enough to be heard. Then the other man told him to shut up. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. The Harrow estate has an annex, a wing added in 1928, nominally a guest house. It was not on the original deed I saw in Miss Ledbetter's file. Which file got robbed? I said. Precisely. Wolfe shifted. If the annex is omitted from the sale documents, the purchaser might acquire it unnoticed, or someone might retain it unnoticed. Either possibility offers motive. The doorbell rang. Fritz brought in Celia Dawn first, immaculate in black, cheeks pale. She saw Saul and stopped short, then collected herself and took a chair. Kestel followed, jaw set. Father Ruiz came quietly, eyes sad. Dwight Harrow swaggered in last, damp from the street, and grinned at everyone like a man arriving at his own party. Wolfe let them settle, silent long enough to make the silence a fifth guest. Then he said, Amos Vale was murdered last night and placed on Miss Ledbetter's doorstep. I intend to identify his murderer before the police blunder into convenience. You will answer my questions precisely. If you do not, I will answer them for you. Nobody spoke. Celia's fingers tightened on her purse. Kestel stared at the rug. Ruiz crossed himself once. Harrow looked delighted. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, will you fetch Miss Ledbetter? I nodded and went for the door. The gathering was warm now, like a stove before a boil. Whatever the annex was, it had turned a sale into a murder, and Wolfe was about to lift the lid. I brought Corinne in through the office door and felt the room tighten around her. She wore yesterday's coat, eyes red-rimmed but steady, and when she saw the lineup, she didn't shrink. Wolfe indicated the yellow chair, and she sat, hands in her lap, looking from face to face as if making inventory. Wolfe said, "Begin at the Harrow estate. There is an annex. Tell me about it." Kestel blinked. "Annex? There is a guest wing, yes. Old service quarters. Not on the appraisal you commissioned," Wolfe said. "Why?" Celia's chin lifted. The appraisal covered the main house and grounds. The wing is separate, in disrepair, and contributes little value. It was listed in a supplement. "It was not in Miss Ledbetter's copy," Wolfe replied, "nor in the packet Vale carried to the signing. Mr. Harrow, your family built it." Harrow spread his hands. "Granddad added a studio for his second wife. Later it became storage. It's a mold farm now." "Storage for what?" Wolfe asked. "Old furniture, papers, junk. I was a kid." Wolfe turned to Ruiz. "Father, you have visited the estate?" "Once," Ruiz said. "Last month at Corinne's insistence. The annex was locked. Amos had the key." Corinne looked up. "He told me it held nothing of interest." "Yet he kept the key," Wolfe said. "Mr. Kestel, when did you last speak privately with Vale?" "Yesterday afternoon. He said he was meeting a potential donor at 9. "Did he mention the annex?" "No." Celia said, "What does this matter? Amos is dead because Corinne made enemies." Wolfe's eyes slid to her. "Miss Dawn, did you remove the appraisal from Miss Ledbetter's drawer?" Her lips thinned. "No, I had no need." "Mr. Kestel?" "No." "Father Ruiz?" "Certainly not." "Mr. Harrow?" He smiled. "I'm not in office drawers, but I asked Amos for a tour of the annex 2 weeks ago. He refused." Corinne looked startled. "You never told me." "You never asked." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Vale met an unknown man at a bar last night and argued about the appraisal and the annex. Thereafter he was murdered. The unknown man carried him to Miss Ledbetter's house. Therefore he was hired." Celia gave a short laugh. "By whom?" "We are not gangsters." "Some are," Wolfe said mildly. "The annex was omitted so it could be dealt with separately. Whoever intended that omission used Vale. When he balked, they killed him and dropped him at Miss Ledbetter's to divert suspicion." Kestel sat forward. "You're saying Amos was bribed to hide property?" "Or blackmailed," Wolfe said. "He controlled legal files and had access to your drawer, Miss Ledbetter. The thief knew exactly what to take. That suggests an insider, yet the carrier was an outsider. We therefore have an alliance." Ruiz said quietly, "This is conjecture." "Not for long," Wolfe said. "Archie, the torn envelope you observed. Describe it." "I did." Celia's gaze flicked away at the mention of rain smear. Wolfe watched her without seeming to. "Miss Dawn," he said, "you arrived at Miss Ledbetter's home at 11:30. You claimed you were helping her withdraw. In truth, you were ensuring she remained home to receive the body. Correct?" She stiffened. "Absurd. Then why call her maid? You feared she would flee. You also knew Vale would not attend the signing because he was already dead or dying." Kestel swung toward her. "Celia." She stood. "I did not kill Amos." Wolfe said, "No, you ordered it. When Vale told you the annex could not be quietly carved out, you employed a crude courier. You removed the appraisal to prevent discovery that the annex sat on a separate deed, one that bequeaths it to a private trust of which you are beneficiary." The room froze. Corinne stared at Celia as if the floor had tilted. Celia's face went white. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Wolfe said. "Your father was Harrow's accountant. His signature appears on the trust instrument. You arranged to have the annex sold apart, perhaps to Mr. Harrow at a token price, then resold once the hidden art cache inside was retrieved. Vale discovered the cache during review. He met your hired man to negotiate his price. He decided instead to tell Miss Ledbetter. You stabbed him for that decision." Harrow let out a low whistle. Kestel's mouth hung open. Ruiz looked stricken. Celia's eyes darted toward the door. Saul rose silently. She sank back into the chair. Wolfe said, "Inspector Kramer will find the trust deed in your safe and the missing appraisal in your apartment. If he does not, I will tell him where to look. Do you wish to spare yourself a search?" Her shoulders sagged. Amos was going to ruin everything. He wanted half. Then he wanted to tell Corinne anyway. "And so you paid a man to frighten her and kill him?" Wolfe's voice was flat. "You misjudged me." She closed her eyes. "Yes." For a long minute, nobody moved. Outside, the street noise seeped in, ordinary and cruel. Wolfe leaned back, satisfied. I reached for the phone to summon Kramer and close the circle. Kramer arrived with 2 detectives in a mood that could sour milk. I met him in the hall and sent him up. The Harrow people still sat where Wolfe had left them. Celia Dawn looked hollowed out, a woman waiting for the trap to spring. Wolfe said, "Inspector, you are in time to make an arrest with minimal exertion. Miss Dawn has confessed to arranging the killing of Amos Vale, to stealing the appraisal from Miss Ledbetter's drawer, and to suppressing the deed for the Harrow Annex." Kramer glared. "You got a confession without me?" "You are here, now," Wolfe said. "Proceed." Kramer swung to Celia. "You say anything?" She nodded once. "I hired a man named Rolf Sader. I told him to frighten Corinne and meet Amos about the annex. He stabbed Amos when Amos said he'd tell her anyway. I told Sader to leave the body at her doorstep. I took the appraisal and her letters." "Where are they?" "At my apartment. Wall safe." She gave the address. Kramer motioned. A detective led her out. Celia went quietly, eyes down, as if she had already been walking for hours. Kestel stared at the floor. Ruiz clasped his hands. Harrow watched with a small, tight smile. Kramer took their statements briskly. Kestel swore he knew nothing of any trust or cash and looked honestly stunned. Ruiz described his call with Corinne and his visit to the estate, weary but clear. Harrow admitted he had pressed for access to the annex but denied seeing art or papers. Kramer listened like a man with one fish on his line and no interest in the pond. When he finished, he jerked his head at me. "Hall. Now." "Out there," he said. "Sader, you let him run. He had a knife and a head start. I'm not proud. We'll find him. Your boss didn't make my morning easier." "I don't think he ever has." Kramer's mouth twitched. "Tell him next time he puts on a parade, he calls me before the music starts." "I'll relay it. He'll pretend to consider." Kramer stomped down the steps and out. The house felt lighter when the door shut. I called Corinne before she reached her cab. She answered on the first ring, voice brittle. I told her Kramer had Celia and would move on Sader. She was silent, then said, "Amos was no saint, but he didn't deserve that." I agreed. She asked what would happen to the annex. I said Wolfe's guess was art and a trust, and that daylight would sort it out. "Come by tomorrow," I told her. "Wolfe likes to be paid in conclusions. Get some sleep if the city lets you and eat something." In the office, the remaining 3 looked stranded. Corinne faced Kestel. "You didn't know?" He shook his head. "No, I trusted Amos." "I'm sorry." "You trusted Celia," Harrow said. "That was the mistake." Ruiz glanced at Harrow. "And you trusted hunger more than duty." Harrow spread his hands. "It was family property. You all treated me like a nuisance. But I wasn't the thief." Wolfe lifted a finger. "Enough. Miss Ledbetter, insist on a full inventory of the annex before any transfer. If art is found, it must be accounted for as Harrow intended. The Foundation may proceed now without the stench of murder." Corinne nodded, the first real breath I'd seen from her all day. "Thank you for believing me." I believe the evidence, Wolfe said. You were adjacent to it. That was his version of mercy. Corinne rose, offered quick farewells, and left. Ruiz followed, promising prayers for Vale's soul and for the Foundation's future. Kestel lingered to apologize again, then went out looking older. Harrow was last. At the door he paused. If there's a cache, I hope it ends up feeding people instead of lining pockets. So do I, Wolfe said, but hope is not a plan. Good day. When the door closed, silence came back like a familiar cat. Wolfe settled deeper into his chair. Archie, tell Fritz that dinner should not be delayed. I've earned digestion. I went down to the kitchen where Fritz was slicing pears with the calm of a man who knows knives for better purposes. He raised an eyebrow, and I gave him the news. He sighed and put another dish on the warmer. We ate. Wolfe was quiet until coffee. Then he said, "The appetite for acquisition is the most common of human vices. It builds charities, then tries to steal from them." I said, "And sometimes it drops a body at midnight to keep the building quiet." "Noise is inevitable," he replied. "One chooses only the pitch." "Next time," I said, rubbing my ribs, "I'd choose a pitch without steel." Wolfe frowned as if knives were a breach of etiquette. "Then run faster." I grinned. "Sure, I'll practice by sprinting to the orchid room every morning." "That would be grotesque," he said, and rang for Fritz, and the brownstone slid back into order, with only a faint stain of midnight left in its cracks. Morning came with a thin winter sun and the faint aftertaste of trouble. Wolfe was at the breakfast table when I wandered in, already installed behind coffee and the Times, as if last night's confession had been a trivial lecture. Fritz had set out ham, eggs and oranges that looked too cheerful for the day. "You're upright," Wolfe observed. "Gravity still works," I said. "Any word from Kramer?" "Not yet, and I do not solicit informs before coffee." At 10, Corinne Ledbetter arrived, steady in a dark suit and carrying a folder thick enough to count as armor. "I postponed the signing and demanded a full inventory of the annex," she told Wolfe. "The board voted this morning. They'll send a team tomorrow with police oversight. Dwight Harrow insisted on attending." "Acceptable," Wolfe said. "The missing appraisal?" "Recovered from Celia's safe. It lists the annex separately and notes a sealed sub-basement beneath the studio. Amos never mentioned that to me." "He mentioned it to his killer," I said. Corinne nodded once. "The police found the trust deed too. Celia was beneficiary. I can't understand how she thought she could hide it." "Desire is seldom logical," Wolfe said. She opened her folder. "Amos handled private correspondence. I don't know what else is missing. If other documents were taken, I want them found before tabloids do." Wolfe considered. "Kramer will search her apartment thoroughly. Make a list of files Vale controlled and send it to me. We will compare." She rose to leave and paused by me. "Thank you for staying. I know it cost you more than sleep." "Just ribs," I said. "They'll forgive me." After she left, Wolfe sat in silence, then said, "There is a remainder." "You mean Seda?" "Yes. A hired man does not evaporate because his employer confesses." The phone rang on cue. I answered and got Pearlie Stebbins. "They picked up your runner," he said. "Bus terminal on 42nd. Name's Rolf Seda. Knife in his pocket. He's talking about being hired, but not about stabbing. Inspector wants your statement this afternoon." "Tell him I'll bring my bruises." Wolfe grunted when I told him. "Good. Tomorrow we learn what was in the annex and whether Miss Dawn removed anything." I went downtown at 2 and gave Kramer my statement. He listened with the air of a man chewing nails. When I finished, he said, "Seda will plead. Dawn's lawyers will try to shove the stabbing onto him, but her confession helps. Your boss was right about the annex. Damn him. He'll treasure your admiration." Kramer scowled. "Tell him he's lucky he isn't on my payroll." I left him to his paper mountain and came back uptown through a cold drizzle that did its best to look like last night. At the brownstone, Fritz was arranging tulips in the hall, because life goes on and Fritz insists on supervising it. Dinner was veal and mushrooms, and Wolfe was in a better mood than a man should be after 2 days of murder. Halfway through the cheese course, the bell rang. Fritz brought in Dwight Harrow, hat in hand and eyes bright. "I came from the estate," Harrow said. "They opened the annex this afternoon with police there. You were right about a sub-basement. Behind a false wall were paintings and letters by Lisette Harrow, my grandfather's second wife. The letters say he hid her work from critics and wanted it donated to the city museum. The museum people are already involved." Corinne looked like she could breathe again. Wolfe set down his fork. So the appetite was for art, not land. Harrow nodded. Amos didn't deserve it, but at least his last secret won't rot in the dark. Thanks for not letting them smear her. He left after a stiff nod from Wolfe. Wolfe had me write the invoice, including a line for extraordinary nocturnal inconvenience. He signed it with the same gravity he gives to orchid schedules. "Miss Ledbetter will pay," he said, "because she now understands the cost of ignorance." I asked if he felt any regret for Vale. Wolfe's eyes softened a trace. "Regret," he replied, "is for errors. I feel only distaste for a man who sold his duty and bought a knife." Then he lit a cigar, and the house smelled of closure. When the door closed, Wolfe leaned back, satisfied in a way he only gets when human folly proves predictable. "Consider," he said, "how many lives are distorted by objects they cannot even use." I poured more coffee. "At least the paintings will see daylight." "Yes, and a murderer will see a cell. That is the closest to moral balance our species achieves." He looked toward the orchid room doors. "Now, Archie, tomorrow's schedule includes no bodies. Guard it." I raised my cup. "You think I can keep New York from delivering surprises?" "No," Wolfe said, "but you can keep them off my doorstep." I laughed because that was all a sensible man could do, and because dinner was still good, and the brownstone, for the moment, belonged to peace again. The next day was supposed to be quiet, and for once New York flirted with the idea. Wolfe spent the morning among his orchids, muttering Latin endearments at the Cattleya, while I typed notes and tried not to look like a man who still expected a tarp to show up at noon. By lunch, the newspapers had the story in a respectful squint. Foundation lawyer slain, CFO arrested, paintings recovered. They gave Wolfe a paragraph and Miss Ledbetter 3, which was about fair to me. At 3, Corinne arrived with a check and a face smoothed by one good night's sleep. She handed Wolfe the envelope. "The board met again," she said. "They've appointed an interim CFO from outside. Marvin Kestel offered his resignation, but we refused it. The museum is taking possession of Lisette Harrow's work with a public statement honoring her and the foundation. It will be a storm, but a clean one." Wolfe slit the envelope, glanced at the figure, and tucked it away. "An admirable outcome, given the price." She nodded. Amos's widow called me. She knew nothing about his arrangement with Celia. She only knows he died on my steps. I'm arranging a pension for her. It doesn't absolve him, but it helps her. "That is sensible," Wolfe said. "Charity begins where responsibility ends." Corinne looked toward me. "They said Rolf Sader tried to bargain. Kramer says he'll plead to manslaughter and testify. Celia won't walk." Corinne exhaled. "I keep thinking about the note. What you deserve. I don't know if it meant fear or accusation." "It meant obedience," Wolfe said. "The author assumed that guilt is contagious, that proximity to a corpse would stain you. In that assumption resides the vulgarity of their scheme." She smiled faintly. "Thank you for refusing to accept that vulgarity." She offered Wolfe her hand and left with the quiet gait of someone stepping out of a tunnel. When she was gone, Wolfe remained still for a minute, then said, "Archie, do you see a pattern?" "I see a foundation that nearly got pickpocketed by its own accountant's daughter." "You see only the surface. Miss Dawn did not require art, nor land, nor even money for comfort. She required victory. The annex and Lisette Harrow's paintings were merely a device to defeat those she resented." "Power's a lousy stomach," I said. "Yet it demands constant feeding," Wolfe replied. "Harrow's bequest intended beauty and relief. It was almost converted into a private trophy. Such conversions are the true crime of civilization." I grinned. "You're getting philosophical on a Tuesday." "On any day that ends in human folly." He poured beer with the solemnity of a sacrament. "In my youth, I believed that intelligence might amend mankind. In my maturity, I accept that intelligence merely equips vice to dress well." "Still," I said, "you kept a dead lawyer from turning into a dead charity." Wolfe's mouth twitched. "Do not mistake consequence for intent. I acted to restore the sanctity of my house, and because the case was interesting. If benefit occurred, it was incidental." "Sure, and Fritz cooks incidentally." That earned a snort. Fritz entered right then with the dinner tray, as if summoned. The aroma of roast chicken and thyme rolled over the office like a promise. Wolfe's shoulders eased. "Mr. Harrow telephoned," Fritz said. "He wished to convey gratitude again. He mentioned a future gala at the museum." "Tell him to send his gratitude to the museum," Wolfe replied. "I do not attend galas." Fritz nodded and withdrew. Wolfe rose and moved toward the dining room. I followed, thinking about Celia Dawn in a cell, Amos Vale in a morgue, and paintings that had waited 90 years for daylight. The world had not improved, but it had, for a moment, corrected itself. Over coffee, Wolfe said, almost to himself, "There is a peculiar irony. Miss Dawn sought to possess art that was never meant to be possessed. Now it will be displayed, perhaps admired, perhaps misunderstood, but at least free." "Freedom's not a theme you usually go for," I said. "I do not go for themes, but I recognize them when they intrude. Possession is an appetite that ruins its own meal. The more one grasps, the less one tastes." I leaned back. "So, what do we do when someone shows up starving for something they can't taste?" "We refuse to feed them," Wolfe said. "Or we feed them justice, which is the only diet that does not fatten greed." I let that settle. Then I said, "Next time, though, can we get justice without midnight deliveries?" Wolfe lifted his eyes. "If you wish to control the hours of crime, Archie, you have chosen the wrong vocation." I laughed because he was right, and because the brownstone was warm, the orchids were safe, and the city outside could throw whatever it liked at the doorstep, so long as it didn't get past me. The case was done, the house was whole, and if mankind insisted on remaining ridiculous, at least we would keep eating well while we watched it. The next morning I found Wolfe in the office with a thin letter in his hand, and a look that meant the case wasn't quite done with us. He said the museum had sent thanks, plus a stray detail. A note hidden behind one of Lisette Harrow's canvases mentioned a ledger kept safe in the annex floor. The curator hadn't found any ledger. "So another prize existed?" I said. "And if it is missing," Wolfe replied, "there is still a thief. Miss Dawn did not know of it. Vale did. Therefore, someone searched the annex before the police did. He had me call Dwight Harrow. Harrow swore he hadn't seen a ledger but was heading to the estate with the inventory crew. He invited me up. Wolfe, of course, stayed planted, but he sent me with instructions sharp enough to cut glass. By mid-afternoon, I was at the Harrow place again, the big house looking less romantic now that you knew how many people had lied inside it. Harrow met me at the annex door, and we went down to the sub-basement where the crates had been. The false wall gaped, empty. Above us, a floor patch stood out, newer boards laid in a neat rectangle. Harrow pried them up. Underneath was a shallow cavity lined with felt. No ledger, just a brass key and a folded scrap of paper. The handwriting was Amos Vale's. It said, "Ledger moved, ask Ruiz." Harrow blew out a breath. "The priest? Looks like." I pocketed the note and phoned Wolfe from the hall. "Father Ruiz," Wolfe said after hearing it. "His motive yesterday was pious but incomplete. Bring him here tonight. If he resists, tell him I will inform Inspector Kramer that Vale's last message points to him." I found Ruiz at St. Catherine's before evening mass. When I showed him the note, he went very still and asked for privacy. In a side chapel smelling of candle smoke, he confessed without theatrics. "The ledger recorded Harrow's donations to shelters," he said. "One entry tied a gift to a man later exposed as a trafficker. Harrow returned the money and denounced him, but the bookkeeping remained. If that page became public, the shelters would be smeared. I moved the ledger to protect them." "Where?" "A diocesan safe deposit box. I meant to tell Corinne once the murder fever cooled. I feared the police would seize it and the press would howl." "Moving evidence is still risky," I said. "I know. But I did not kill Amos." "I don't think you did, but you're coming with me." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe received Ruiz as if he were a late client. Ruiz placed the ledger on the desk and opened it to a marked page. Wolfe read, eyes narrowing, then softening. "You acted from a motive I respect," Wolfe said. "Protection of innocence. Yet concealment breeds more concealment. You should have told Miss Ledbetter and the police at once." Ruiz bowed his head. "I was afraid." "Fear is common," Wolfe said. "Courage is useful." He closed the book. "I will inform Inspector Kramer that this ledger has been secured without criminal intent. He will decide what lecture you deserve. Mine is complete." Ruiz thanked him quietly and left, looking lighter for having stopped carrying the thing alone. When the door shut, I said, "For a minute I thought the whole case was going to crack open again." Wolfe shook his head. "We were closing it properly. Justice without clarity is indigestion." Fritz announced dinner. We ate roast chicken that made daylight seem less hostile. Over coffee, Wolfe was unusually reflective. "Harrow's money performed two opposite functions," he said. "It fed compassion and tempted greed. The same annex held beauty meant for the public and a ledger meant to be hidden from it. The object is not the cause, Archie. The appetite is." I raised my cup. "Here's to appetites that don't require midnight tarps." He sniffed. "Here is to restraint. It is rare and therefore necessary." Later, I stood by the window, watching a clean sidewalk and an empty stoop. The case had ended the right way. Celia Dorn in custody, cider in a plea deal, Lisette Harrow's paintings headed for a museum, Corinne rescued from a frame, and a ledger returned to daylight without injuring the shelters it supported. New York would keep producing crooked schemes, but this one had been straightened and put away. Wolfe lit a last cigar and said, "Not quite to me. The world is tolerable only because occasionally someone chooses decency over desire. We witnessed both choices. Remember the better one." I nodded. "I'll try. But if decency needs a legman, you know where to find me." He waved smoke. "Unfortunately, I do." That was as close as he comes to affection. Fritz hummed downstairs. Wolfe's orchids waited for morning, and the brownstone for the moment belonged to silence again. I went to bed thinking of Amos Vale, who traded duty for profit and got but a knife, and of Corinne, who kept her spine and saved a trust.